So this morning, before we actually start to introduce the individual embroidery processes that we're going to do together, I thought I'd show you some of my very old archive samples of a machine embroidery I've done before, so that you can get a sense of the sort of diversity of things you can create using some of these basic machine stitches and applique, reverse applique and free embroidery. So my original degree was in textiles for fashion, and I specialised in print and embroidery, so I've always used it quite a lot in my costume work. So this is sort of spans some of the projects I've done for my BA right way through to things I've done as a freelancer. So when we look at all the different fabrics here, I'm going to sort of pick out certain images or techniques and actually talk about them, and then later on when we introduce them to you, they'll make a bit more sense. So first thing that probably catches your eye is this very vibrant 1980s image here. This was from the 80s actually. I used to do freelance textile print and embroidery for the high street, and this was for a company, Lily Children's Wear. So these were just samples that were left over from collections, and the techniques they're using here are applique, reverse applique and just freestyle embroidery. So if we go into one area, so if we look at this sort of spade, a heart spade sort of playing card imagery that we've got here, this is actually made up of 4 different types of fabric which have been sandwiched together, and then the individual shapes have been first of all drawn in plain stitch, and then decisions have been made as to what colour to expose. So orange is the top fabric, which has got sort of an element of pink on it. Then we've got yellow, and then we've got the blue behind. So when you're doing your reverse applique, if you have more than one layer, you can cut through to different surfaces and expose different things. So a good example is this spotted fabric here is the top fabric, and then there's a sort of mustard colour, a maroon and an orange behind. So all of these little sections were completed individually and then juxtaposed or stuck together really. So if you see on the back, it gives you a little clue as to how it sort of begins its journey and how it works. So this is a process I've used quite a lot over the years. So this is for a commission for a bridal waistcoat that I did years ago for a groom. Again, same process of reverse applique and cut through, and then individual sections placed together. So they're quite sort of sturdy sort of fabrics when they're finished. This one's sort of playing on the same idea, but this time using sort of exposed frayed seams as well. So reverse applique is something I've used a lot. This is from a very early BA project, so I've used a sort of rough Hessian fabric, and this is the thing to think about when you're designing your doublet. What type of fabrics are viable to actually embroider with, and what will give a sense of the period of the doublet. And then I've used a sort of very cheap lining. So usually when you're combining fabrics together, you would think about using one sturdy fabric at least within the sandwich of fabrics that you put together. So this sort of linen Hessian was behind, and then the cheap sort of lining was put on top. Initially the idea of the shape was just drawn with the sewing machine, and then it was zigzagged decoratively, and then this was freestyle embroidery, which we'll talk about in a few sessions time, which is where you put the dog feet down on your machine and you're actually moving the fabric around to create the marks. So I've used that process a lot. This is just trying out the free motion on the fabric on its own, and you can see what it does is it creates quite an interesting sort of blister effect. So this is from the same collection. Again, reverse applique and applique. The applique bits are these antique bits of lace that have been added onto the top of the fabric to create sort of an aged quality. Same collection, using sort of unusual fabrics sometimes, especially when you're working for theatre. You know, sometimes you have to sort of think about overall impact and use a cheap fabric. So this string vest was something that I was playing with here, looking at the images of creating lace. And this was a fabric from my BA, actually, from a garment I made, which was a printed and embroidered chiffon, which was made into evening wear. So some areas have been printed, then some have been appliqued over, and other areas have been added additionally lace effects. And this is how that idea started out initially. We're just sort of trying to make fabric look aged, so I've used sort of rust oxide pieces here to wrap in the fabric to create that effect. So it's a bit like using a breaking down technique with your embroidery. And then actually using a very fine lace with a very cheap calico. Again, one of the fabrics is a stable fabric, so the calico holds the whole thing together, and then using different machine stitches and working imagery across. So what else have we got here? Let's have a look. So these are, again, some reverse appliques. These are done on a Devore print fabric that I created myself, where it actually eats the fibres away. So again, the applique is the lace fabric being put into the sheer fabric, and then these bits are sheer printed, as you can see, and then it's got an image printed over, all from the same collection again. Okay, I'm just going to sort of scroll through things now because I think there's quite a lot to see. This is a sample that started out, this is the initial sample. It became a lot more sophisticated than this, but this was used for a Royal Opera House Fire Demon costume. So it was just the initial applique down the side of the Fire Demon's frock coat. So here, if I pull these layers back, you can see we've got quite a few layers. We've got yellow, then we've got orange, then we got red on top, and then black. So we started that sample with 4 layers of different colours, and then I've started drawing the structures on and then thinking about what area to cut through to expose that colour. So this is orange, here's the red background, and the red's in here, and then using contrasting colour stitches to actually work through. So that was done onto sort of a brocade type fabric, as you can see here, which is a sort of fabric that you might think about incorporating with a stronger fabric into your doublet.